Hello and welcome. This is going to be a beginner's guide on how you can jump into the Star Wars Expanded Universe. The Star Wars Expanded Universe is incredible. There's so much entertainment, so much great storytelling, but it's kind of intimidating at first. There's at least 200 books, dozens of games, and a ton of comics I couldn't even find a count on. So you really get a sense for this galaxy far, far away. Like if you want to know somebody's backstory, more information on the Force, the light or dark side, politics, the economics, you just want to hear kind of military stuff like dogfighting or foot soldiers, or even you want to hear about the generals and kind of how their strategies pan out. Because it's not war on one planet; it's over a galaxy. So it's just a whole different ball game from things we're kind of used to hearing. That's an extra level of interest to it, I suppose. There's also a few romance. I don't think romance is going to be the strong suit. If that's really what you're after, you might look somewhere else. But it is there. I take that back. There's fair romance, but it's not the focus where it's good, if that makes sense. There's horror stories, there's crime thrillers, and I'm going to call bounty hunting kind of a subgenre. There's only, I can think of 4 off the top of my head, bounty hunting books, but they're so good. Just the way bounty hunting works in it is so interesting. All these can take place over several different eras, which make it really give each book kind of its own flavor because of what's going on with the galaxy at that time. One of the greatest strengths with the EU is it's so unpredictable, especially once you're reading the ones that are further away from the original 6 movies that we're used to. So if you don't have the context of knowing what comes before or what comes immediately after these books, like if you're reading a book 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, you don't know how it's going to end. And it just makes it that much more interesting because it's not like a standalone series. You kind of know the universe already, but you don't know what's going to happen in that book. So when you have all these different books of in the same universe but of different genres, they kind of become more than the sum of their parts. Full transparency, to me, if a book is a 4 out of 5, but it's set in such a familiar setting of Star Wars, it just makes it just a little better the way those books all click together. It may honestly raise a rating. It may be a 4.5 just because it's in the EU. And that's going to make some of these ratings sound unfair, so that's not exactly true, because there are 5 out of 5 books that on their own would be that good, but it's just an extra layer, which is kind of why you invest your time into the expanded universe. So I'm going to give some recommendations here. Like I said, it'll be real brief, no spoilers. First recommendation on a way to jump in, dip your toes in the water, would be the Thrawn Trilogy. It's kind of the first big threat to the New Republic after we left off of, Episode 6. It has a lot of familiar faces, Han, Leia, Chewie, Luke, but it has some new ones. And to me that's important, because if I start reading a book and they just right off the bat throw 5 new characters at me I've never heard of and there's no one familiar to me, and then this may just be a personal thing, but it's just kind of hard to keep track of it all. There may be people that's not a big deal at all, but you throw 5 or 10 characters at me out of nowhere, it just gets hard to remember them all and kind of picture them separately reading a book. But if you think a trilogy might be a little too much of a commitment, you just really want to barely dip your toes in the water, there's some good standalones that could still give you that Star Wars style to know if this is something for you. Shadows of the Empire, I give it a 4 out of 5, really. It's really good. It's between episodes 5 and 6. So, Vader's chasing after Luke, but organized crime is also quite interested in him. So, kind of a conflict between them. One thing that the only reason this is not a 5 out of 5 book for me is towards the end, as you're reading it, this perspective shifts between characters back and forth so fast, like 2 or 3 times a page, and that's just really hard to keep your bearings on what the situation is, what their surroundings. It's hard to have a mental picture for a paragraph of running through a hallway or what have you. So 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, but could have been 5 out of 5. Just a funky writing style. It kind of reminds me like a Tarantino movie a little bit, where he will show the same scene at the end, but from this person's perspective, and then he'll just replay it from the others. It's kind of like that, but it all pans out. It comes together really well. So I'm probably too harsh taking off a point for that, but I don't mean to bash the book. It is good. Another good standalone that you'll already be, if you're watching this, you've already seen the movies. So this is going to fall between 3 and 4. It's Kenobi. He's kind of the desert watchman, keeping an eye on Anakin as he grows up on Tatooine. But since we know he's a Jedi, he is kind of a little too helpful to the locals. So he ends up in some trouble of his own. Really good book. If you feel a lull in the middle or kind of bored, really stick through this one because the ending is really good. I personally listened to it on audiobook, and that was excellent. So, there's a good audiobook out there for it. One thing I'm going to mention here, I don't have a slide on it, but the X-Wing series is big with a lot of people. I haven't gotten into it myself, but it is highly recommended. But it is one that I just started the first book, and I don't know, maybe not quite in the mood for it, and they just threw all those characters at me. And I do think the book does a good job of describing them and giving them all their characteristics, but that's just kind of a personal hang-up. I will circle back to that one, though. It is quite a long series. It's kind of a commitment. So, and my reading style, I think, really is dip my toes in the water here or there and not commit to like a 10-book series, which is the further into the expanded universe you go timeline-wise, the series start to get really long. So before I really commit to those, I think it's worthwhile to read a bunch of the standalones. Just kind of bounce around. So, one trilogy you could really start with pretty easily is the Darth Bane trilogy. It's 5 out of 5 to me. It's not the first chronologically, but it is one of the older books that people commonly read. More on that later, but it's set 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, which, if you're not familiar, you know how we say BC and AD. In the Star Wars universe, 0 BBY, or ABY, I guess you could say, is the Battle of Yavin, which is when the first Death Star blew up in Episode 4. So, a lot of these are going to be based right around there, but this one happens to be 1,000 years before that. Darth Bane is probably the strongest, or at least the most intelligent Sith Lord to ever live. He just has a lot of foresight. He personally set the events in motion that eventually led to the Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. There's great audiobooks out there for it. I should circle back to the Old Republic. There are books centered around the Old Republic. It seems like a really interesting time period. Basically, instead of, well, this middle book's called The Rule of Two. I mean, I think everyone pretty well knows from the movies that Siths usually there's only two. Well, that was really Darth Bane's idea. Before then, there were thousands of Sith, and there were thousands of Jedi. It was like Force users, but extravaganza. So, the Old Republic, it was just a really interesting time. There are books like Revan Deceived. I can't remember the other one, that are centered around when that was more common, but some people don't like them so much because they conflict with the games, Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2. They don't really do the same things with Revan, so I'm kind of halfway through my playthrough of Knights of the Old Republic 2. I don't want to get that all mixed up, so I'm kind of saving those for later. Keep in mind those are good, but you should probably play the games first, is what I've heard. Moving on. These are kind of horror, thriller type things. If you're a Skyrim player or Elder Scrolls at all, you know how usually under whatever mage's castle, I can't think. Basically, under the mage's College of Winterhold, there's always some crazy experiments. There's something kind of sinister going on. Well, let's take that and let's go times 10, because this is not just a fantasy magic academy. This is a Sith academy where they are evil. So if it's too evil for them, it's going to be pretty interesting. I don't want to get too carried away on that. And this is the prequel for this, but they're separated by quite a bit of time. So don't get too wrapped up in that. You can really read them in either order. It's not going to be a big deal. If you are a Maul fan, I would read these. If you're not, you're not really into Maul, I'd maybe save them for later. But Maul Lockdown, he's basically locked down in a prison where they put on fights for the galaxy and people can bet on them. Really intense, kind of action-packed. Shadowhunters, more him kind of doing Sidious's bidding. Not quite so action-packed, but good books. I think I'm gonna really say if you're a Maul fan. I don't know that they would be super interesting if you weren't. If you were kind of like, that guy was kind of lame. I mean, he just got cut in half the first time we ever saw him, other than these. I understand. Do definitely read the Han Solo trilogy. It tells Han's background. Or maybe you're going to make fun of me because I need to say Han. I don't know. Like things like, how did he get that Millennium Falcon from Lando? Kind of interesting way he went about that. A lot of kind of posturing. It picks up, I think the first we really hear about him, I think he's already at least like 10. I think he's a young teenager. And then when it leaves off towards the end, it kind of leaves us a little before episode 4. So, this just a good series, give you a background on somebody, and that's going to be a recurring theme in the Star Wars universe. When there's an interesting character, there's almost always going to be, not always a series, but usually at least a standalone book, kind of tell you more about them, because people just crave things like that. Speaking of which, Shatterpoint gives us a lot more info on Mace Windu. His force ability is called Shatterpoint. It's kind of unique to him. Basically what that means is if there's some situation, some big event in motion, and there's one kind of object or person who could really make all the difference, he can kind of sense who that is. Like, for example, he could sense in episode 3, at least in the novelization, that there was something going on with Anakin. There was something going on with Palpatine, but he hadn't quite pieced it all together. But this novel, he has a student kind of go rogue. He has to go find her, track her down, take care of that. I'm not going to give too much more away on the book itself, so let's go on to the next one. Darth Plagueis. I don't know. Really, it might as well have been called Darth Sidious. It does have Plagueis towards the beginning, or really for quite a time, but it just seems like I got a lot more info on Sidious out of it. Goes from before episode 1 into the events leading up to 3. Just really excellent. Kind of political. A lot of political scheming. You know, I could see if you just want an action-packed book, this would probably be kind of boring for you. But if you just want to know more about him, how he finagles everything around to work the way it does, this is a really good book. And it would be good to read this and then this next recommendation, which is the Dark Lord Trilogy. I shouldn't say Darth because it's Darth Vader, but he's the Dark Lord. Anyway, the Dark Lord Trilogy goes Labyrinth of Evil, Revenge of the Sith, and then Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. So it just gives you so much more information on Anakin's fall, things there's no way they could pack into the movies. So if you kind of were a little bit negative about episode 3, keep in mind they only had, a bit over 2 hours. One of these books, the one that's the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, I know if you listen to it on audiobook, is over 10 hours long. So, I mean, people won't sit in a theater for 10 hours. So there's just no other way for them to get all the info across. But if you read these, I think you'll walk away with a different mindset on Anakin and a little bit different mindset on Palpatine. At least I think you'll see him as a lot more intelligent. Just the way he makes things fall into place, it's incredible. He had to be slipping by the time episode 6 comes around, and because he's just so on point to turn Anakin. He's like a domino. He just says to Anakin, "Do." I'm just gonna leave it there, but he becomes less of a guy who kind of had bad character and turned to evil really easy, and more just kind of got manipulated and almost mentally abused, kind of hung up. So, I had to cut the video there before I got too much revealed on these three books. But you just have to trust me, they're quite good. And I'm going to give an honorable mention here to the Bounty Hunter Wars. Those are also really interesting. They take place more in the original trilogy era, but I think that'd be quite good to read. I think I'm going to leave it to you from there. I really believe you need to read the Star Wars Expanded Universe by interest, not chronologically, not, read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because you kind of, there's so much to it that you don't want to make it a chore. So I think if you kind of look into these, pick what interests you the most, or maybe all these interest you. These are certainly my highlights. You will start asking questions all on your own, like, what is, what's the backstory to this person, or I want to hear more about this planet or this time period, and you'll be well on your way. You'll be on kind of a journey to read all these books, being that there's over 200. I am counting a few of the a few of the young adult, which it's confusing to say young adult because some of them are kids books. Um, some of them aren't. So I count a few of those in there. But I'm going to link in the description a spreadsheet that shows quite a bit of info on these books, like what order they're in, and at least give you what all of their titles are. That'll help you kind of poke around. So I'll leave it to you guys from here. Thanks for watching the video.